right, well, welcome to Dubai, everyone. Good to have you here. So my name is Tania Jarjur. I'm the General Counsel. This means I lead the legal department here at Yellow Door Energy. So we're excited to have you. Just a bit of like I said, I'm going to try to make this not so boring and not so dry. I will ask you some questions in the middle to try to see if you're awake, to see if the brain's still functioning. But just a little bit about myself. We'll talk about the market, about Yellow Door, and a couple case studies to get us through the discussion. So a bit about myself. I was born and raised in the UAE. So I am technically a local, even though I'm not. I'm originally half Syrian, half Lebanese. Went to the US for university, did my bachelor's in business administration at Duquesne in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Then decided that I wanted to save the world. So I went to law school, of all things, in Portland, Oregon at Lewis and Clark. Did a specialization, if you will, in international business and humanitarian law, two completely different things. So once I graduated from law school, decided I had to pay off my student loans. So working in social justice was probably not the best job for me. Went into private practice, doing mergers and acquisitions of all things. But also dabbled in some project finance. I did a bit of project development, some traditional oil and gas work, worked for all the evil corporations. Then decided to set up my own legal consulting, and Yellow Door was one of my first clients. And so it was basically love at first sight. And when my business partner and I decided to separate ways after a few years, I decided to join Yellow Door in-house full-time. When I started, I was obviously the first legal in-house person at Yellow Door. Now we are a team of about 8. But back then, the department, and each department was one person. We were 10 employees. So what was really, really helpful was that I got to get really integrated with the core function in the business of Yellow Door. And that, I think, is what, I think there's somebody in here that's in the legal industry, right? So core for, I think, a really important legal department is to be able to really understand your client, and your client is your business. And to be able to understand Yellow Door's core function from the very beginning through its inception and through its growth, I think has been really critical for me in my career. So just a bit of some of my hobbies. As you can see, I like the outdoors, right? Wake surfing, hiking, camping, anything that it has to do with nature. And so why solar? Obviously, I love the environment, right? I love being outside. Dubai, it looks really hazy right now, but sometimes we have some good days, and sometimes we have some nature up in the north. But how we as humans function and manage our lifestyles, how our corporations do business, how we work in this day and age is really important in terms of how we sustain and maintain the world that we live in. So I think the vision that Yellow Door provides is something that's really close and dear to my heart. I like to see the world survive. Hopefully it can. Hopefully we can make a big of a difference and it doesn't actually implode the way we think it's going to. And also I just love Halloween, so it's on there because I think it's one of my favorite times of the year, and so it has nothing to do with solar, but I just love Halloween. Every year, I feel like we say the same thing exactly every single year. Literally, for the last few years, it's just been the hottest year on record. Every single year, over and over and over again. It's not getting any better, and also, as you can see, us as humans, the more we progress, the more we bring civilization and modernization to our everyday life, the more of a negative impact it actually has on our environment, on the sustainability, on the world around us. It's a really, really frustrating conundrum that we have here. We want to modernize, and yet at the same time, the way we're doing it in today's world, as we're doing it today, it's actually negatively impacting our environment. I'm sure you've all seen this before, right? This is what we at Yellow Door are trying to save. This is what we're trying to get away from, right? Actually making this world a little bit of a better place to not be so cheesy and cliche. But what is the solution, right? There's no one size fits all. There isn't one answer. There's so many different things we can do. It's about our lifestyle. It's about how you do business. It's about how you supply inventory and the logistic chain. There's so much about the business structure, about the personal structure, about the government structure that needs to change. And that is changing slowly but surely, but it involves everyone and everything, and everyone needs to be a participation in this journey for the just energy transition. So role of governments is really critical, right? They are the starting point. No corporation, no personal person is going to do anything unless they're forced to do it. I mean, some people will, unfortunately, but the most people won't unless they're actually forced to. Not just until they're forced to, but when they actually see it impacting their bottom line and seeing the value addition that it brings to their everyday life, to their business, to the savings, to everything around them, right? And so a lot of people think of the COP events as now more and more becoming a lot more greenwashing. The UAE hosted it last year. Lots of oil and gas companies come out now. Everyone thinks it's just a big fluff. Well, actually, there is, especially this past time, a lot of the, especially the governments and the GCC, they had their feet put to the fire, right? They started really making a lot of these commitments. UAE's made net zero commitments. Saudi, Bahrain, Oman, Turkey, Jordan, they're investing, especially the UAE and Saudi are really investing a lot of money into green funds, into green projects. They're really trying to get the financing and the initiatives and to really become a leader in this industry. So banks also, you've got Barclays, HSBC, all of these major investors really signing up to the UN principles of responsible investments. Effectively ESG becoming a part of their mandate. They really need to be investing in renewable and green solutions and projects out there. They're incorporating it into their everyday way of doing life and working. So banks are really getting involved. The legal industry is really getting involved. Everyone thinks lawyers just help corporations get a lot of money out the door, and that's kind of all we do. But effectively, we're a critical function of this transition as well. We work with governments to write laws and policies. We litigate against offenders, holding people accountable. We support corporates in terms of developing strategies to hit their net zero targets, structuring sustainable deals, pro bono work for the NGO community. There's a lot of work that the legal department actually gets involved in. And lawyers are really being held accountable themselves, just as much as the corporations are being held accountable. Obviously, being a lawyer, I have to plug in a little bit here for the legal industry. So just some examples. You've got a firm called Eversheds, which is a major, top-tier firm in the UK and all around the world now. So they founded all of these different allegiances for the legal industry to start creating their own specific net zero targets within the legal firms, within the legal community itself, and what the legal community is going to be doing to help promote this. Michael Moore's, they created this environment bank solution, which creates natural habitats for diversity, and it creates this net gain system where you can actually use these as credits towards some of these net zero targets as well. So this other law firm, Pogos Goodhead, they represented major claimants all around the world, well, specifically in Brazil, to really hold corporates accountable for some of their toxic waste. And Edelstahl Goddard supported New Forest on the launch of a sustainable forest impact fund in Africa, currently valued at $500 million. And this is just a drop in the bucket of some of the other deals that are going on that law firms are involved with. But the biggest thing, and as I was saying a little bit earlier, corporations, right? Big corporate America, big corporate world, they need to be incentivized. They are some of the biggest consumers of power, and they are also now really committing to this just energy transition, which is a huge, huge benefit for the world. And they're now leaders. They're really sort of encouraging everyone else to join the game as well. So obviously you've got Amazon, Meta, you've got all these big corporations. So now effectively, half of the world's largest companies are committed to net zero targets. So what I find really interesting about this slide is, for the longest time, the US has really been the leader in this movement, right? They've been promoting all of these solutions. They were the first to do distributed generation. They were really sort of key in this growth of this transition. But what's now really happening is that you're seeing a slowdown in the US as well. And the EMEA region, so Middle East and Europe, are really picking up, right? As I was saying, especially after COP, I think the Gulf countries are recognizing that this wonderful gas and oil that they've had for so long that sort of propped them up is not sustainable. It's not going to last forever. And if they actually want to continue to be competitive in the marketplace, competitive against the US market, the European market, they have to really move into this new way of doing things and this new way of looking at the environment as well. So they've started really leapfrogging, and that's what makes this region a lot more interesting in the last few years especially. Looking at this, anyone see anything really interesting? I know I've already kind of given you the answer on the slide, but anything interesting. So the blue is renewable energy investments in 2023. And 2023 was a significant year because for the first time in history, actually, electrified transport investments overtook the investments in renewable energy. And that's another concept of how all of this has to work together to actually make a change, right? There's no point producing solar for a factory if everyone's still going to be driving diesel fuel cars and gas fueled cars everywhere. So electrified transport is also key to making this transition, and it's really sort of picking up speed. So Elon Musk, love him or hate him, but he's a genius in his own right? So while that's all encouraging, unfortunately, it's not enough, right? If we actually want to achieve net zero by 2050, research shows that we need to have 3 times the annual investment that we currently do. Despite all of those promises for investments, we need 3 times that to actually achieve net zero by 2050. Just think about that for a second. That's a huge amount of money. And then if we actually want to keep our global warming to 1.5 degrees, we need 4 times that, right? So that's a huge mission, and it's a lot of work that we as a global community have ahead of us, right? So where's Yellow Door in all of this? Why are you here today? So our vision as Yellow Door is to power emerging economies sustainably, reliably, and efficiently, and if possible, and for the most part, less costly than what people are currently spending on their power solutions now. So we do this by I'll talk about some of our shareholders. We've got great shareholders, Actis, Mitsui, IFC, and Apicorp. I'll also talk about in our case study a little bit of this transition we've had to get here. But how do we really do this? We do this by providing distributed generation power to the commercial and industrial customer, right? So effectively, we're bypassing your utility company and we're going directly to the consumer. That's what's called distributed generation. So a little bit about, plug about Yellow Door. So something that I'm really proud about is that over 32% of our workforce are women, which is huge in the Middle East, which is the MENA average is about 20%, right? So not only that, but a lot of them are also in positions of management and positions of power as well. So pioneer myself. And obviously we've got over 140 employees in 6 different countries. So we span quite a few jurisdictions. So we were talking about international business operations. We are poster child for where everything can go right and where probably everything can go wrong. But so just a little bit more about us. We've got offices in UAE, Bahrain, Saudi, Jordan, South Africa, Oman, and Turkey. We've got over 90 customers, 130 projects, and all we just started in 2015. So we're still, despite all these wonderful statistics, we're still a baby of a company. So as I said earlier, Yellow Door, so our vision is to really get clean, sustainable, reliable power to the direct consumer. We do that by a couple of different ways. Energy efficiency is a key thing, right? How do we consume? How do our customers consume? How do we help them consume less, right? So it's not just about providing them sustainable solutions, but how do we also help them consume less power in general? And then second of all, we've got this concept of on-grid solar and off-grid solar. I won't go into, I don't know if you guys are engineers and you know too much about this. I won't bore you too much with the details, but this idea of on-grid solar is if a consumer, as a customer, is connected to the grid, we can connect our renewable power system to the grid, and they can benefit through that as well, through a concept called net metering, where they consume from the system, and whatever they don't consume goes into the grid, and they get credit for that from the utility bill. You do that with on-site, directly on their property, or wheeling, where the site is further away from their property, and we have a big piece of land. We can build a much bigger system, and then we quote unquote wheel the power through the utility grid to multiple facilities that they own. The other solution is off-grid. So if they're out in a remote area, there's no grid connection anywhere near them, then we can build up a system with solar, battery, and just connect directly to their consumption, and they don't need the utility grid at all. That's eventually, hopefully, the goal. So ideally, there's different ways to do it. Customers can go and do this on their own, but we would like them to come to us. And why do we want them to come to us? Because we will spend all of the money for them. We will do all the operating, we'll do all the management, we'll do the construction, we'll manage everything for them. They don't have to do anything except worry about paying us the monthly utility bill once it's all set up. So how do we do this? So we enter into what we call a solar PPA, which is a power purchase agreement. In each country, it sounds a little bit different, it smells a little bit different based on different regulations, but effectively what it is a PPA. So we sign this contract with the customer. So they spend no money up front. We invest all the capital ourselves. We pay for everything. We manage the permits. We manage the contractors for all the construction and the installation. And then we manage until it becomes operational. And throughout its operations for about 20 years, 15 to 20 years, depending on the customer, we'll maintain it. So we'll do the cleaning. We'll make sure it's continued to run. We'll continue to deal with the regulators on their behalf. And they pay us a monthly bill based on power generation. And also in exchange to protect against their 20-year payments that they're supposed to pay us, and in case they don't default or go bankrupt over that time, we collect some security from them, some liquid security in some form. Bank guarantees or parent guarantees or something to the extent, depending on the country and depending on the customer. That's basically our business model in a nutshell. And again, more plug for Yellow Door about all of our customers. So we've got anywhere from your multinationals like Unilever, Nestle, Procter & Gamble, to your regional players of all industries. We've got telecommunications, we've got real estate, we've got laundry, we've got food, we've got everyone. This is just to show that it's not just the Amazons and the Metas of the world that can go green, right? They aren't the ones who are going to make the only difference in the world, right? It's literally any kind of corporation can do their part in being part of this journey. So, you're business students after all. We're getting into the case study time. This is probably the most interesting, right? So, as I'm explaining a little bit of this to you, I want you guys, from an international business operations perspective, to think about what issues would come about, what kind of international operations would you have to think about, that you have to plan for and manage. As I'm talking to you about, this is one of our customers. So this is one customer that we've serviced. The customer is Majd Al Futtaim, which is a major Emirati local family here. So quite a big family, quite a reputable and powerful family. They own multiple different types of businesses, right? One of the main ones that they have are shopping malls. Shopping malls and the Carrefour, and the right to the Carrefour brand, which is, I don't know if some of you know, Carrefour is a major French department grocery store. That's pretty international. So Majd Al Futtaim, or MAF, they've got all of the Carrefour brands throughout the Middle East, so not just GCC, but also the Levant, and massive shopping malls all over the GCC. So they really wanted to go green. Right? They found, to them, going solar was intrinsic. It was part of their sustainability goals. It was part of their concept of transforming how they thought about resourcing, how they thought about business, how they thought about supply chain, and empowering people and empowering the lives of the people around them, right? So we support Majd Al Futtaim in Jordan, Bahrain, UAE, and Oman. So 4 different countries, 4 different sets of regulations, 4 different sets of doing business, 4 different cultures. Everyone thinks the Middle East is all one. That's like saying all of the United States is all one. That's as if saying Mississippi, California, Montana are all exactly the same culture and all exactly the same way of doing business. Couldn't be further from the truth, right? So even within the GCC, even within Saudi, UAE, Oman, you've got a very different set of doing business. So in Jordan, with one wheeling site, we were able to service 35 of their Carrefour shops. In Bahrain, we covered the rooftop of an entire mall, which actually made it look a lot more aesthetically pleasing in my mind, but also supplied a huge amount of power for them, almost all of the power needs that they had. And within the UAE and Oman, again, it's more shopping malls that we were able to provide power for. So again, think about logistics, think about technicalities, think about, and I'm going to ask you questions after I give you a nice little video tour of some of our projects of the UAE, of Yellow Door. Am I playing this right? No. So this is actually Bahrain Mall, the building of Bahrain Mall. So since we're in the UAE, I'm going to have to do one more video of actual UAE projects. Right. Yeah. So basically, if there's a rooftop, we want to put solar on it. What I like about this is just showing how, when you see a lot of big corporations advertising how they do solar, you've got Disney having this big Mickey Mouse, solar-shaped panel. If you're in a city like Dubai, lots of skyscrapers, you don't have big plots of land necessarily around you to build a big solar farm on your property. And it doesn't take that, right? We're creating, this was like on their property, we created car parts. So on top of the parking lots, we just put solar panels. On the roofs, we put solar panels. You can find a way, as long as you've got a creative design engineering team, which we do, there's always a way to find a way to do it that's actually gonna work and not be shaded by trees around you. All right, answers, thoughts about what you have to think about. If I'm gonna produce a project for Majd Al Futtaim, in multiple countries, multiple sites all around each country. Can I get some volunteers? Yep.
Permitting.
Yeah, do we need this?
Companies.
We need this. Sorry, you need to. Yeah.
Permitting, construction companies, designers, and just working with some of the local governances. So you guys basically contract with like the bigger hierarchy company. How do you find all of those in different companies or different countries, excuse me?
All the different contractors. Yeah, exactly. Anything else? Yes, no, absolutely. All really good answers.
From the supply chain perspective, like sourcing all the parts and then manufacturing, contract manufacturing, and then each of the shipping logistics going to different locations.
Absolutely.
And how to solar panels are somewhat of a fragile product, so how are you going to keep that from becoming obsolescence during transportation?
Absolutely. And dealing with customs in each country. I'm going to pass it down.
Sorry. I have a question. Do a lot of these countries have subsidies related to green energy that you're working with, or they're not there yet?
Good question. Some of them do, not all of them do. And some of them have it in relation to, what they'll do is they'll waive custom duties for importing of the equipment that's related to solar power.
Okay.
But and sometimes there'll be releases of some of the corporate tax requirements and things like that. Jordan especially is quite a pioneer in that. The UAE, less so because there aren't many taxes here anyway. So some of the incentives they don't look the same, but they try to achieve some of the same objectives.
I'd say access to a maintenance team. So if like a grid goes down, how long can you repair it for, and like does it impact the electricity being generated?
Absolutely. Great answers.
Which solution is best for that customer, and I think even like the placement of the solar panels could vary depending on the location to maximize the amount of energy that's created.
Absolutely. It's managed with all the shading around and things like that. Very, very, very true. Did you have something? No. Oh.
Okay. So I think it's rather questions. I think. So with your model and the PPA thing, I imagine you gotta have like huge capital because you're investing like upfront, all of that.
Yeah.
How
Very
does
key.
that work?
Very good question, and I'll explain. Yes, and that's a key part of it, right? And that's a very key part to the actual very complexities of doing a multi-jurisdictional. Any other answers? Yeah. What is there? One more question.
Sorry, who was it? Oh, for you. How the energy, you said if your clients don't use all of their energy, they can give it back to the grid and they get a credit. So how do you make money on that? Do the utility companies pay you for that energy that goes back into the grid?
Also, great question. It depends on the country. So in some countries, what happens is that power that goes back into the grid. So let me take a step back to answer your question. The way we structure our contracts is that the customer has to pay us for everything that's produced, whether they consume it or not. It's a take or pay, exactly. And then whatever they don't consume goes into the grid. And in the country that has a net metering structure, they're allowed to the customer then will get the credit from their next, their utility bill. So in the UAE, for example, as you can see, while we can do all of this on the rooftops, it's not going to manage 100% of their consumption of utility in general. These stations and factories operate 24/7 for the most part. So they're consuming a lot of power at night where there is no solar. And if we don't have a battery on their system, then they're going to be consuming from the utility. So whatever that they haven't consumed during the daytime production will be credited towards their nighttime utility consumption. Now there's another concept called net billing, which is what they have in Saudi Arabia and also in some other places in the Northern Emirates that they're going to try to do here, where whatever is not consumed by the customer is put into the grid, and then the utility pays the customer a percentage, a certain rate per kilowatt hour that's shoved into the grid. Yeah. Okay, so all really good answers. And so I think from the perspective of try to combine a lot of what you guys said and to answer your question about funding, right? So as you can understand, a company like Yellow Door is a really capital intensive company, right? We invest everything up front, so the customer isn't spending anything. So you're all MBA students, which also means you understand that we can't just be constantly asking our shareholders for equity distributions every single time we need to invest money. We need a lot of money all the time to be building more and more projects. So it's not a good use of their money if we're just doing everything on equity. So what do we have to do? We also have to raise money from lenders, from financing institutions. So these financing institutions now really getting on the net zero train is really convenient for us and really helpful for us because it means they've got a mandate to really support us and really invest in renewable projects. But what do banks need to do? Both our shareholders and our lenders need to make sure their money is protected, right? So they need to know that if a customer is going to default, or if we're going to default, at some capacity, they're going to get paid back, right? There's going to be some protection on their financing. So when you go to finance one project, or just projects like Majd Al Futtaim's slew all over the region of projects, then you've got different regulations. So you've got to make sure that your contracts are compliant with all the different regulations. You've got to make sure that, yes, you've got land ownership issues that are very different. You've got permitting issues that are very different. The way the contract is structured in each market is very different. So in the UAE, we're not allowed to call it a PPA. We have to call it a lease. In Bahrain, we're not allowed to call it a lease, we have to call it a PPA. In Jordan, we have to call it a lease, but we can't really be too much of a lease because we can't be a finance lease. In Oman, we can't really be either, we have to be a service agreement. So you've got different contracts that all officially look different, but all to the banks have to sound and smell exactly the same and have to have the same principles, right? So it becomes quite a nuanced game where, you know, legal becomes very important. And so if any one of you want to understand how legal and business interact, this is a key case study right here. And then in terms of the risk allocation, right? So the banks and our shareholders want to know that their money is protected. So if there's a change in law that happens, which can happen often, or if there's a force majeure, COVID made everybody really look at force majeure provisions in a way they've never looked at it before. So if something like that happens, who's paying? Who's going to take on the risk? And all of these contracts have to effectively look the same. They can sound differently, but in some capacity, that risk and reward allocation, you have to be as synchronized as you possibly can. You have to have that not just synchronized, but also compliant with the local rules and regulations. And then also from that perspective, all the accounting is different. How our poor corp and accounting team, how do they manage the accounting of leases versus PPAs versus this, and all the cash flow requirements, because cash flow is going to be different. We're going to have different permitting structures, so timeline of construction will be different. We need cash at different times of the day for different countries. Revenue generation, we're not going to achieve commercial operation until we are actually able to build all the different projects. So revenue stream will be haphazard and all broken up between the different projects, right? So this is to say that every single project that comes through Jarjur, and this is a key example of one, requires the participation and involvement of every department of the company, from accounting to risk to legal to the commercial team, to literally every single department has to be involved. And so it was quite an interesting project, and lots of moving parts, and sure, lots of lessons learned of things we should never do again and things that we can always do again. But yeah, definitely an interesting case study to say the least. So fundraising. I've had the privilege of working with Jarjur from its inception in some capacity, either as an external advisor or in-house, right? So I started advising Jarjur in 2015 when there were 2 employees. Now we are 140 plus. Right, so when I joined full-time, we were 10. And as I've mentioned earlier, a company like Jarjur is very capital intensive, so we need money all the time. And we can't wait until our project is built and generating revenue to start building the next one, right? Otherwise, we'll be here, we won't have the statistics I showed you earlier, right? So you need money all the time, and you can go to banks, you can go to lenders, and you can help fund part of your projects through them. But you also need shareholders, and you need money. So when Jeremy started this company, he started as a spin-off from one of his old companies that he was working on. So he was 40% shareholder, and his old company was a 60% shareholder. But that's not enough. They invested a bunch of money, a few $1 million. A few $1 million in a company like this isn't going to get you very far. So for the next few years, we spent raising a bunch of money, right? Literally anybody who wanted to fund was given an opportunity to fund. And I will now ask you and sort of get your participation here from being a business, MBA student. If you guys have had any personal experience that you've seen in classrooms, what sort of, if a company needs money, what are the different ways of doing it? What are different structures you've seen? What are some of the scrappy startup concepts you've seen going? Any ideas? And then I'll tell you what we did, and then you can tell me if we did it right or wrong.
I think for a company like this, grants would be one of the biggest access. I'm not sure how it works in the UAE, but I know in the US, if you do go towards sustainability or anything, it's very common for the government to just give you money for research.
I know, that would have been great at the time. And now they're starting to, but not at the time. So yeah, no, that would have been a great concept. I know in the US and Europe, it's a big part of it, but unfortunately not here. I saw another. Yeah.
Probably giving investors more of the individual investors exposure to Yellow Door through alternative investments. So that could be included in some sort of package with other clean energy stocks.
Yeah.
So something like that.
Yeah, stocks definitely, for sure. It's a big way that startups raise funds, absolutely. Yeah, down here.
Like venture or angel investors?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I was thinking too, like GE had something similar with the sustainability fund, and so they use corporate bonds issued through different years, and so maybe that could be one thing you could use.
Absolutely. All also really great answers. Anyone else? Josephine, I'll give this back to you. I don't know how to turn this off. Corporate bonds especially is a great idea, and I think this is something that we're looking to do now. Unfortunately, we were too small at the time. So in North America, I think it's a very different story, but in the Middle East, especially back then, there were no government-sponsored events, and even banks, when we went to them, they just said, you're too small, this risk is too big, we're not used to this concept of distributed generation, we don't really want to deal with you. Go prove yourself, prove a track record, and then come to us once you've actually grown yourself and established yourself. Well, that kind of leaves you in a pickle. What are you supposed to do with that, right? You need money. So basically, friends and family. We scrounged up friends and family from Jeremy's crew, from the old shareholders, alumni from his MBA school, and we actually got about $20 million, which was a great sense of investment. I don't remember the exact number of people who invested that got us to the 20 million. I want to say it's around 15 people. So the idea of giving them stock was key, right? Or giving them some kind of stake in the game to be able to incentivize them to come up with that. But giving 15 people stock in your company is incredibly, horrendously administrative a nightmare, right? Imagine every time you want to do anything, you've got to get 15 people on board to say yes. So what we did was we gave them convertible loan notes with the idea that, and especially because they were all investing at different times of the day, at different times of the year, some this month, some that month. So to try to rectify and consolidate everyone, to try to keep this as sort of unified as possible, we created what we call SPVs, these special purpose vehicles, right? So all these investors got convertible loan notes with the idea that eventually we know we need more money, we're gonna have to go to our Series A equity raise, right? So while we're working on Series A in the background, we'll give you this basically IOU saying that if we don't achieve Series A by this dateline and this deadline, then we'll give you your money back with interest. Or if we do, you're going to convert into equity at this SPV level. So that by the time we get to Series A level and we actually needed to raise about 65 million, it was much more manageable. All of these investors, they either got paid out if they wanted to exit or if they wanted to stay. They got equity in a vehicle so that, we had a nice clean cap table at the end of the day. So that's how we structured that. With Series A, we really thought we were going to have one main shareholder at the table because that was our goal and that's what we were moving towards. But apparently we were quite popular. So we had 5, which was helpful and not helpful. At the same time, it really legitimized our business. We had IFC, we had AMC, which is the private equity fund basically of IFC. We had Equinor, which is, I guess, from the Norwegian government. We had Apicorp, we had Mitsui, and we had our continuing shareholder, Adenium, who managed to stay in as well. So we basically had 5 main players at the table, which means everyone had roughly about 20%, give or take, which is great because each one had their own perspective on things. They were able to give us support in different ways, but then it meant you had 5 different opinions on how to do something. And so we basically, we joked that we had the United Nations of shareholders. There was not one person leading the way. And so we were able to really grow our business plan, absolutely, with their support. And also trying to, manage 5 different sets of politics. It was also a really interesting learning experience from our side. But then we realized it was really time to grow even bigger. Right, we needed a lot more cash because we ran out of the 65 pretty quickly, and trying to raise more capital from 5 different shareholders was definitely proving to be quite difficult. So we went out into the market to do our big Series B equity raise, right? We needed one main player to take the lead, to hold the baton and lead us to that next stage of growth. And luckily, our United Nations of shareholders at least got us on the map to get the attention of big private equity, right? So as I'm sure you've seen on our website, so Actis is a big UK-based private equity fund, now integrated into General Atlantic, and you might have seen that on the news. So we have a commitment from them to invest up to $400 million of equity over the next 5 years, because trying to fundraise every 2 years is a real distraction to our business, right? We're here to try to make the business grow, not to constantly raise more and more money and raise equity. So we wanted a player that was really going to be in it with us, in it for the long run. And we were able to find that in Actis. And the key thing now is really growing. They're helping us grow from this hustle bustle startup culture kind of a company to a company that's really thinking about it from a long-term value perspective and a socioeconomic value perspective. So it's this, we're now in teenage college phase, and Actis is really sort of helping us get there, which is quite an exciting time. We closed with them in October 2022. So to close things off, so I didn't realize this, but today is World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development. So all the engineers in the room, happy Engineering Day. And obviously there's a lot of engineering to be done in the renewable energy space, but it's not just for the engineers. As you can see by some of the discussions we've had today, there's a lot here. Legal is critical, financing, capital is important. It's hugely important. Without money, you can't build these projects. You have to sell the projects, and you also need to be able to understand procurement. It's very important from a ethics perspective, from a sustainability perspective. Same with policy and ESG. So at Yellow Door, we're creating and really trying to implement a culture of ESG, not just internally, but also with our third-party suppliers and our contractors. Yeah, any questions? And for those celebrating, soon to be celebrating Ramadan Kareem. Any questions? Yep. No? Wonderful. I like questions. Questions make this interesting. Just hearing me talk isn't. Do you want to give her the?
Oh, sorry. Do you have a question? What are your margins like compared to the traditional utilities around here?
That's a great question. It depends on the market, right? So we're looking at IRRs on average in the UAE around between 7 to 8%. In Saudi, it's a struggle to get there as well, but in countries like South Africa, the margins are much higher, right? But also higher risk, right? So when you're looking at lower risk countries, your margins are just naturally going to be lower. There.
What is the plan for expansion? Are you targeting other countries, or are you solely focused right now on the countries that you're currently operating in and expanding there?
We're really, this year, focus is our key thing. Really focusing on the markets that we're in and digging deep and really trying to expand and trying to take up as much market share as we possibly can within our markets. We're doing pretty well in the Middle East, and really South Africa is our biggest focus of growth right now. But yeah, scaling in this industry isn't the easiest thing to do, and I think that's where the funding, net zero targets as well is really important. So that's where all the different moving parts are critical for bringing this company to scale.
So in terms of expansion of your ESG principles into supply chain, what are you doing to ensure maintenance of ESG with your suppliers and transportation logistics?
This is a great question, and I wish I had Hassan here to answer. But so effectively what we're doing, so we've got our own policies in place, and we've got our net zero targets as well. And the key is to really find contractors and suppliers that work within that, right? And holding them accountable. So everyone is, luckily for us right now, everyone's sustainability is the sexy term, right? Everyone's got this in mind. So most contractors and most major procurement vendors are working towards this, and they have to prove it. They have to prove it not just to us, but to all of the bigger players. So it's a continuous market that we're working on also auditing them. You have to be able to audit them, you have to be able to track them, and they have to be able to provide us that documentation to do so.
You mentioned on a previous slide regarding the commitment to 0% net emissions and how much more intensive the capital investing needs to be in order to reach those goals. At the rate we're currently at, how soon do you think those goals would be reached?
That is like the $600 billion question. Look, I think the world is wising up. Right, I think you'll still have some naysayers out there, some people who still believe global, climate change isn't a thing. But the governments that have money are really making a serious effort, and they know they have to. So whether or not we'll get there by 2050, I think we'll make a serious dent. I have to be hopeful. I have to be, otherwise it's just too dreary, too dreary of an outlook. All right, I think we have to end it. Although, one more question, yeah.
Just what would you say is driving the business more, really? The way that you guys maybe would save on utility bills for companies, like, you have a 20-year lease, your return on investment is 8-10 years, then you're gonna start saving money on your utilities? Or is it more like corporate ESG pushing, companies to invest in renewable energy?
It's interesting. I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day. It's very customer specific, right? And for the longest, especially when Yellow Door first started, it was just savings. ESG and global CSR initiatives weren't a thing at the time in 2015. And if you couldn't save the money, it was really hard to convince them. Now it's almost 50-50. Right, it's a combination. So, because it depends on the customer, it depends on the market. But like, for example, in Saudi, we're not able to save the customers as much as we are here, for example. So in the UAE, it's more than 50% savings on their bills. In Saudi, while it's not as much, they know they've got their targets. They've got targets either from headquarters in Europe or even locally, right? Requirements from the Saudi regulators themselves. Countries like South Africa, it's a combination. They want less priced power, they want reliable power with all the blackouts that they're having. So it's country specific and customer specific, but it's really growing to, I think, almost be even out at this point in time. Yeah. Sorry. They're just good questions. I can't help.
My question is that, one of the biggest problems in ESG is that when you have cities, especially like Dubai, that are so vertical, how would you bring solar or clean power there?
Yeah, so this is the ultimate question, right? So in a city like Dubai, that's where all the rooftops really sort of are key. And they're building out these industrial sectors further out of the city, so you don't have a lot of shading from the skyscrapers around you. So that's the idea, is that it can be anything. You can build carports and just put the solar on the carports. If you've got plain land, you can just do it on the plain land. But for cities like this, it's really important to work with your utility as well. And so you can either build a utility style project or do more of the rooftop stuff. Thank you, guys.